Well, Hazelmary, first of all, welcome to Bedford tonight. It's an encouragement to see so many people come to this evening's meeting. Perhaps you could tell us a little bit about your opening of the Guesthouse in 1986 and why you decided to hold to a policy of married couples only in the double rooms, and what prompted that and what sort of situations were there back in 1986?
Well, it became, we actually had a smaller guest house before we moved in, and we had the same policy there because it was becoming, during the 70s, which is when we had that one, it was becoming very apparent that society was changing and not for the better. And eventually, when we got into Chimova, we made a much firmer stand that we weren't going to, as Callum said, let double-bedded accommodation to anything but heterosexually married couples. What Callum is thinking about, I think, maybe there were different instances that occurred during that time. For example, quite near to us is a much larger and swishier hotel, and they had somebody working on it that first few weeks that we were there who was doing electrical work. And on Friday, he used to go back home to his wife because he came from somewhere like Somerset. And one day he came down to me and he said that he would like to book a double room over the weekend. And I said, is this for you and your wife? And he said it was for him and his girlfriend. And I said, I can't be party to anything like this. I think you'd probably be more comfortable and happier elsewhere. And I said, he asked me why. He thought that was a quaint point of view. And I said, because I don't want to contribute to anything that might spoil your marriage. And he said, oh, don't worry, my wife will never find out about it. Well, we couldn't contribute to anything like that. And right at the other end of the scale then, a few weeks later, we had a young couple turn up who didn't even know, when they went to register, they didn't even know each other's surnames. And upon further conversation, I discovered that they'd been out together for the evening. They had money over from their time out together, and they were trying to decide whether or not they'd buy another round of drinks or would they spend it on accommodation for a night together. And not even, having only just met that night, that was something else that we couldn't get. And everything in between those two stories was wrong as far as the Bible and as far as God was concerned. So we certainly couldn't contribute to that.
And can you tell us, Hazelmary, is that policy stated, or do people just find out about it when they knock on the door?
Oh, no. Yeah. No, that would never do. Actually, that's not entirely true, because you do get people coming in because they see the hotel sign up on the road. There are two ways of going about it. If people telephone, then we have a script that we sort of take them through. For instance, if I heard a male voice and he asked for a double-bedded room, I would say, is this for you and your wife? And we wouldn't use phrases like the other half or her indoors or anything like that. We're very clear. We would say, is this for you and your wife? And obviously the opposite is true if it was a female voice. When people come on the door, it can be a little bit trickier because if one person comes in, it's easier because you can say, double room, is this for you and your wife? And you certainly wouldn't use the word partner. But then if you have a man and a woman standing there, you have to act a little bit. See, we're Cornwall and we're country, so we can act a bit dim if we want to. and you would say, is this for you and your wife? You know, indicating both of them. And oddly enough, people are amazingly honest and will often say, well, no, we're not actually married, but we've been together for so many years and so on. And then I would say we prefer to let double-bedded accommodation to married couples. And never did we have any real problems until Mr. Hall and Mr. Preddy turned up.
And it's also fair to say the policy is stated on your website and on the booking forms as well, so people are not in the dark about it. No. Have you applied the policy to family members?
Well, yes. My brother at the time was living in Mallorca and he wanted to come home with his girlfriend. And my parents hadn't seen him for 20 years. In fact, didn't even know where he was virtually for 20 years. So they were very excited about this. And he was coming home, and it was a question of, do I give way to mum and dad, or do I honor God, or risk upsetting him, or whatever. But anyway, you kind of knew this test was coming down the line sometime. So I just asked for God's help, and I said, no, I can't make an exception for my brother. And they came home together, my brother and his girlfriend. They took separate rooms. There weren't any problems. God overruled. And looking back on it, I think actually that the girlfriend was quite happy to have a bit of a break from my brother. So.
Well, can you tell us about when Mr. Hall and Mr. Preddy booked into the Guesthouse, and share a little bit of what happened and the stages as they unfolded?
Well, that kind of began the night before, really, which was a Thursday evening. And the scenario was that Bernie, who's our colleague at the hotel, and it's been the three of us all the way through, really. He's a cousin of mine. Bernie was upstairs dealing with the visitors. My husband had gone down the garden to feed the chicken, and I wasn't feeling very well, so I thought, I'm packing it in for tonight, and I went to lie down. And only I could hear the phone ringing, so I thought, I suppose I better go and answer it, because it might be money, so I took the call. It was for a double room, for our last double room for the following weekend. We didn't have any other space, so we couldn't have offered them anything else anyway. And I took the call, I took the booking, I was careful to record the credit card number properly. The guy said he had a dog. Well, that did inspire me, because I love dogs, so we chatted about the dog. And then I put the phone down. And just as I did, Bernie walked into the room, and I said, oh, Bernie, I've done something terrible. What's that, he said. And I said, I've taken a booking for room 9 for tomorrow, but I omitted to go through asking whether or not it was for a married couple. So he said, what name was it? And I said, Preddy. And he said, don't worry, and Mrs. Preddy rang up this afternoon and asked if we took dogs. So I said, yes, there was a dog. So I went to bed, quite happily thinking a married couple were going to turn up the following day. But of course, we know now that that wasn't so.
And then when you refused to provide them with a double room, you were then visited by the police, I think?
No, the police didn't come to us. Right. They phoned up. They immediately, they immediately left the hotel and went straight to the police station. The police were very kind to them. They turned into tourist guides and rang around until they found alternative accommodation for them. And the police did ring us the following day they seemed more interested in whether or not we'd return the deposit, which of course we did immediately anyway. But we appear to have, what's it called, a non-violent hate crime is what we've been guilty of. So I think I'm going to go for an ASBO next.
And the next stage of the process resulted in the Human Rights and Equality Commission pursuing legal action, and at that time you got in touch with the Christian Institute. Of course, that went to Bristol County Court, and in February of 2011 you were ordered to pay £3,600 to the two men for injury to feelings. Now, can you tell us how you were able to raise the £3,600, please?
Well, the court case was in December 2010, and we were warned that the judgment wouldn't be for several weeks or whatever. So we had to go through Christmas and New Year, not knowing what the outcome was going to be. And through Christmas and New Year, cards started to arrive and envelopes started to arrive with money and checks in from people I'd never met. Now, Pete and I found this, and especially Pete, I have to say in the beginning, found this really hard because we'd worked all our lives, and as believers, we were tithing. And to have it coming the other way felt very odd when it first began. And I can remember this money coming in and not knowing what it was for or what to do with it. And by the time the judgment came round, which was February 2011, so about almost 2 months later, when we went into the courtroom and the judge said that we had to pay them £1,800 each because of injury to their feelings, when we got outside, the Christian Institute team, who knew our situation financially, said to me, "How on earth are you going to pay that?" And I said, "Over Christmas and New Year, £3,650 came in." And it was £3,650, £50 over, not under, because that's the kind of God we're dealing with. Yeah. And it was just as though he'd said, "I know it was going to be, which of course he did, he knew it was going to be 3,600, and it's 50 quid for you, my girl, for being so faithful." Oh. Yeah.
Well, then, of course, the case was appealed to the Court of Appeal in London and then to the Supreme Court in November 2013. And should say the Christian Institute fund your legal fees and your legal costs. Yeah. It was simply the fine that had to be raised. But during that time, your guest house was subject to vandalism. You received death threats, and Peter received death threats. Perhaps you'd tell us a little bit about some of the things you experienced in that time.
Yes, I mean, we're laughing about it, and we do enjoy a certain amount of humour through it, because if you don't, it's going to get you down. But there was a very serious side to it, in that what Callum's talking about was there were death threats. There were problems with the English Tourist Board, so there were problems with officials. There was also tyres slashed. There were, the worst for me, well, the second worst for me anyway, was that they loosened the wheel nuts on Pete's car, and he drove about 20 miles without knowing this until a friend pointed it out to him. So I'm thankful for God overruling in that situation. And then possibly the worst one of all was they nailed a rabbit to a gatepost, and because we didn't just upset the homosexuals, we upset the Satanists as well by making a Christian stand. And the rabbit had to be alive to be of any effect for the Satanists. So that poor creature had suffered, and I felt bad about it, really, really bad about that. We called the police every time. There was a lot of damage to the property. All the lights down our driveway were smashed. We enjoyed a staircase down onto a private beach at the bottom of the garden. That's all been destroyed, so we can't get onto our beach anymore. All that kind of thing that happened. I suppose really it was the rabbit that really got me down.
And when the tourist board had these dealings with you, they refused to refer any more guests, and of course that led to a drop in your custom base and a drop in your income. Is that?
Yes. Yes. The way it works is that the only inspection scheme in the country is run by the English Tourist Board. And if you want to advertise in the best magazines and on the most lucrative websites, you have to be inspected by them. Otherwise, they won't take your advert. And because the Tourist Board, I can't say asked us to leave, the way they put it was that if we renewed our membership that year, it would be refused. So there was a parting of the ways. I did hear many, many months later from somebody, from a solicitor that rang them to find out what their view was. They said that if we signed a prepared statement, prepared by them, recanting and changing our policy, they would be very happy to take us back, like that was going to happen. So anyway, we lost then, because we couldn't advertise in these places, we lost somewhere between 60 and 70% of our income. So we've had to survive against that. Really.
And really that led to you having to put the house up for sale. Yes. Can you tell us just about your financial situation as it was after the Supreme Court at the end of 2013, please?
Well, putting the house on the market, we didn't realise until an accountant pointed it out to us that we had to pay off the mortgage with all other fees and moving costs and what have you. We had to pay capital gains tax. And when we did our sums, we discovered that we'd have left there with £90,000. Well, we were a household of 5 at that time, of course, because Pete was still with us. And where were we going to find a home for 5 adults for £90,000. So we were really in a difficult situation. But I kept holding on to the Bible verses which tell me that because I belong to him, I'm always going to have a roof over my head. It might not be the one I'd like. I'm always going to have clothes on my back and food to eat. And I thought he's taken me on board. I've given him the most precious thing that I own, which is my soul. So therefore, he's going to look after me. And I just trusted the Lord Jesus for this. With that, an email came through, which from a lady, an elderly lady in Essex, who'd been giving us money as one-off gifts here and there. She'd heard that we were, the house was actually under offer, and there was a lot of pressure on us from the finance company to accept the offer. And she sent this email through, and she said, "You must not sell. If you sell, they have won. Somehow I'm going to pay your mortgage." So I had a conversation with her. It turns out that she does own some property left to her by her father, and the rent from that is £3,600 a month, and that's exactly our mortgage. So it's £900 a week we have to find. She finds it all for us. She lives in a one-bedroom bungalow and survives on her pension. So that's sacrifice, that's Christian sacrifice, because if it wasn't for her, we wouldn't be here tonight.
And it's a lady that never knew you, nor had met you at that time.
No.
So it's a reminder that God is no man's debtor, and he's provided for you in that time of need. Well, thank you, Hazelmary, for sharing with us.
Okay.
Hazelmary will be around at the end of the meeting if you want to speak with her individually.
Thank you.